I'm going to call the meeting to order, and hopefully we'll have a quorum soon. But I am going to change the agenda slightly and would like to start with the item 2670, the Board of Pilot Commissioners.
It's just consent.
Is it consent?
It's just consent.
I thought that.
I don't know why they thought.
What?
It's within the consent calendar.
Okay, well, all you have on the agenda are.
These are
This is part of the consent. Okay. I apologize. We have a different format, so I didn't realize this was still on consent. So I don't know. Do you have any questions on this? I don't have any questions either. So we will leave this on the consent, and we will then take it up when we have a quorum here.
This is
Very well, thank you.
to discuss Transportation Commission.
Okay, so we'll move to item 2600, the Transportation Corridor Improvement Program.
Ready?
Okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon. Bimla Reinhardt, Executive Director for the California Transportation Commission. On the trade corridor improvements, we've got some proposed language to Assembly Bill 268, and we would like to continue to work with staff to make further refinements to it. And it's the reporting requirements on the program itself.
Okay, are there any questions? I don't have any questions either. We will then take a motion when we have a quorum. That's right, I know. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is awkward. I know some of Ms. Harkey's going to have questions on the Capital Outlay support issue, I assume. Okay.
I think probably by the time we're done, it all should be by the time we can do it. This will probably take.
Well, other than the consent items, the only thing we have left is issue 2, the bridge inspections. Do you have questions on those? Okay, so we'll move to issue number 2 then. All right. That's all right. Since we have a quorum, I'm going to ask that we go ahead and take roll.
Buchanan,
Here.
Adams, Evans,
Here.
Fuhrer, Harkey.
So now I'm going to go back to the consent calendar, and it's been asked that we remove items 1 and 4. So we have the remaining items 2, 3, and 5 under the Department of Transportation, and items 1 and 2 under the Board of Pilot Commissioners. Move. Is there a second? Okay. Can we take roll?
Buchanan,
Aye.
Adams, Evans, Evans, aye. Fuhrer, Harkey, Harkey, aye. 3-0.
And we just heard under 2600, issue 1, the Transportation Corridor Improvement Program, and the recommendation there is to have staff work with the department to develop proposed trailer bill language to adopt this. So, second. Okay, take roll.
Buchanan,
Aye.
Buchanan, aye. Adams, Evans, Evans, aye. Fuhrer, Harkey, Harkey, aye.
Then I want to go to under item 2660, issue 2, the April finance letter for the bridge inspections. It's the April finance letter for the bridge inspections under the Department of Transportation.
Are we just beginning that?
We're just beginning it, and I'm trying to get to the action items first, just in case we lose our quorum.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Norma Ortega. I'm the Deputy for Finance for the Department of Transportation, and Rick Land, our Chief Engineer, is here with me. This proposal includes 2 requests for the bridge inspection program. The first is a net increase of $3.6 million in federal authority so that we can maximize our federal reimbursement for existing bridge inspection activities, and there would be a net decrease in state funds available. And the second request is needed to address backlogs of bridge inspections, and we are requesting an increase of 5 positions and $868 million to meet bridge inspection schedules and complete inspection reports for state-owned bridges.
5,000. Are there any questions? Ms. Harkey?
Are there, you're going to add 5 positions. Are there any individuals within the department that could occupy those positions now?
Yes, there would be people that we would shift over. We just need the authority to do the bridge inspection work.
Okay, so we don't really need to add 5 positions. We could conceivably...
We would be, if we have excess staff in other parts of the organization, other program elements, the proposal would be to shift that activity over to this activity is funded out of our maintenance program.
Okay, I could support this if we're not adding 5 positions, if we're just transferring in-house, but not hiring new.
That would be what we would ultimately do, is if we have excess staff in other parts of the organization, those positions would be shifted from another program to this program. But we need the authority in the maintenance program in order to implement this proposal.
I don't have a problem with 1, but I do have a problem unless we alter that such that we could just take existing people rather than adding 2 staff. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Councilmember Evans?
Would these 5 new positions be subject to furlough?
They would probably be subject to furlough. I think our bridge inspection staff is impacted by the furloughs schedule. Right. It's probably on a self-directed. So some of them, if they have inspections, they would go out and then they would take the furlough day, a different day. Their pay is still reduced.
No, I understand that. It's just my concern is that here we would be hiring new people, investing time in hiring as well as training and getting them on the job, where we're actually furloughing people whose hours could be reinstated and at much less cost to the state actually doing the same job. So that's my concern.
I have a couple of questions, and this may just be in our own staff, but under this we say the department's requesting $4.65 million in federal expenditure authority with a corresponding reduction of $1.2 million in state highway account.
Right.
So are you requesting 3.6? I think that's what you said in the beginning of your presentation.
Well, that's the net change. And what we're doing is these positions were previously funded at, say, approximately 80% federal funds and the 20% state match. We actually have the authority to bill the feds 88-point-something%, and so we're making an adjustment between the fund types.
Okay.
So these are federally funded positions with a small match.
So these are going to be new positions. So we provide 12%, the feds provide 88%, and we're able to fund the positions for the inspection. Is that what we're saying?
The first part of it are existing positions and existing dollars.
Right.
And all we're doing is adjusting the funding split.
Okay.
The second part of the request was to add 5 additional positions for bridge inspection activities.
Okay.
And that would be to address the backlog in bridge inspections. Again, most of those positions would be funded with federal dollars, and it's critical that we do that work. Otherwise, we could put federal funds at jeopardy.
Okay. I absolutely believe the work needs to be done. Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to, and please, bear with me. So the first paragraph then, you're not asking for new funding. We're not approving new funding. You're asking for a reallocation of the funds. Is that correct?
And shifting it between fund sources.
Okay. And right now, the federal funds are spent. Where are they right now, and which category? How are they being spent?
Part of the program is being funded with federal funds. The other
Right.
part, and part of it is state funds.
Right.
The federal funds would be used on projects if they weren't funding these positions.
So they'd be used on road projects or whatever. So we're taking federal funding from road projects and shifting it over into the inspection program.
But if we don't do the inspections, we're
Right,
we're at
we
the
jeopardize
potential-
the.
Yes,
the-
correct.
Okay. So, all right, I just want to be sure that when we approve it, we're approving not new funding, but we're approving a transfer of funds. And then my next ties in with the questions that have been asked on the 5 positions. The $868,000, does that represent the same 12% state, 88% federal funding?
I believe that that's correct.
Okay. But the federal funding is flexible so that if we didn't need it for the inspections, we could use it for roads or other purposes?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to tie in with what both other assembly members have asked, because, to furlough people on one hand and incur the cost of training, hiring, benefits, pensions, and everything on the other, and then furlough those new people doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. And then the other question is there a way to absorb this work within the current staffing? And I guess what I got back from you was there might be, but you're not, you haven't completed the analysis on that yet.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah.
We need to add it to the maintenance program. This is it could be a shift from another part of the organization to this, but we still need the authority and the budget authority in the maintenance program to do the additional inspections.
But it's not, is it new money or is it a transfer of funds?
It would be new money to the maintenance program
Coming from the maintenance, from
from
what
another
account?
part of the organization's state highway account money.
Okay. Are there any, Sevens?
Well, I wasn't going to ask a question or make a comment. I was going to make a suggestion. I realize the department is functioning under the governor's order regarding furloughs, but this is a repeated issue in conference committee last year, and it was a big issue because the administration in many areas will be requesting additional staffing while the staff is still under the furlough order. So that presents a real problem. What I would suggest we do is approve the funding but not the position authority. And that kind of resolves at least part of the problem, but it leaves the position authority open for later discussion. So I would make that motion.
Okay, so we're approving that,
I'd like finance to address that point.
yeah.
Mark Tollison, Department of Finance. I would like to note, with respect to the furlough issue, that under the current proposal, furloughs are scheduled to end at the end of this fiscal year, so these new positions would not be subject to furlough.
And if the governor in his May revise confirms that, I'll be real happy. And we may have a whole different kind of situation. But as of now, I'm not willing to proceed on the assumption that the furloughs will be ending.
And I have to add that since we don't have the whole budget, the number of positions, and we're going to talk about staffing in other areas, I think it's a prudent motion at this point in time.
Is that a motion? Second.
Okay, can we take the roll?
Buchanan?
Aye.
Buchanan, aye. Adams? Evans? Evans, aye. Fuhrer? Harkey? Harkey, aye. 3-0.
Okay, then I'd like to go to the 2 items we removed from the consent calendar. The first is the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, item number 1.
Okay, the department is requesting a 2-year limited term increase of 5 positions and $412,000 in federal authority. These resources are needed to effectively administer the recovery funds and to comply with all the federal reporting, monitoring that comes with the federal funds.
Okay. All right. Do you have any questions?
My issue is the same, positions.
But we are required to continue reporting. There's been an awful lot of reporting imposed on the state in order to receive these funds. So we need additional positions, and they're limited term in the local assistance program to effectively monitor all the and deal with all the reporting for recovery funds.
Okay, well, I'm not a big supporter of the federal dollars to begin with because they've placed certain limitations on us in our ability to negotiate on a lot of issues. So I haven't been a big supporter of that. But more to the point, since we've got them, if there's some way that we can do this without staff additions, I would be very supportive, especially in light we know that the furloughs are dropping off in June, and we're pretty, I would be pretty sure because it's not been the way to handle things. I don't think any of us are liking furloughing here and hiring here. I think there needs to be some kind of a general look at the overall picture of what we're doing. And so I agree with Ms. Evans when she says it just, that doesn't make sense. I could support this without the positions, or I can just make a motion to oppose it and see what happens.
Well, I think, I'm not sure how the motion would be worded, but I think, again, approving the funding without the authority to hire new positions and reserving that issue for later, pending the May revise and the governor's order or not order to continue the furloughs, I think would be the right way to do it.
I think we could approve the funding. We could have this brought back when we take a look at the entire budget after the May revise is released as well. My question is this: how are we handling our federal era reporting now? Don't we have projects going on today, don't we?
Yes.
And so who's doing that, and how are we handling it?
Well, we have staff in our local assistance program that is monitoring it, but every time we turn around, there's additional resources. We did have some level of limited term resources added to the department to address the reporting and processing. We work very closely with over 600 cities and counties, and some of the projects are very small. Everybody in the state receives some level of ARA funding.
Right.
And there are some additional reporting requirements.
That were imposed now that weren't in effect when you first started getting the money?
Absolutely.
Madam Chair.
Different legislative, congressional reports and others.
Okay.
Jessica DiGiambattista with the Analyst's Office. We reviewed the department's request, and the department has actually indicated that some of the workload is, in addition to the reporting, they actually need to review bid documents for some of the rural transit operators, because this funding does come through the state for them as opposed to going directly to the transit operators, which it does in the urban areas. And they've indicated that they have so many applications that they have a huge backlog, and they're actually delaying projects at this point. And so in light of that, we felt that the request was reasonable, notwithstanding the members' concerns about the whole furlough issue. But it does appear that the positions would be needed to handle the workload on a limited basis.
And is there an impact, whether this is approved now or a month from now? I mean, you're requesting the positions to begin.
The request is for federal fiscal year, or excuse me, state fiscal year 10-11, so
okay.
Deferring it until you complete the discussions is not going to matter.
Okay. Do you have a motion, or is there a preference?
Well, let's see.
No, we pulled it off consent.
Then I would move adoption of item 1 with respect to the funding, but not the position authority.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Take the roll.
Buchanan?
Aye.
Buchanan, aye. Adams? Evans?
Aye.
Evans, aye. Fuhrer? Harkey? Harkey, aye. 3-0.
And item number 4 under consent is the April finance letter for the ADA settlement implementation.
The department is requesting a 2-year limited term increase of 3 positions and $391,000, as well as a one-time increase of $3.215 thousand from the state highway account to establish an ADA infrastructure program as directed in the lawsuit settlement entitled Californians for Disability Rights versus the Department of Transportation.
Okay. So I don't know if you or Elio who has the best explanation, but the $3.2 million, it wasn't clear to me exactly how that money was going to be spent.
We are required to provide monitoring and evaluation plans, and we need to be able to comply with the order from the settlement. So we will be using those resources for consulting services contracts that specialize in ADA issues to address increased accessibility complaints because of the lawsuit.
And do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, and it's our understanding that there would be a small staffing component for the department to start up essentially a new ADA compliance program, which it will be required to do as part of the settlement of the lawsuit, and then also some one-time contract resources for them to handle an increased level of complaints, which they expect to receive because they're going to have to advertise very widely that people are allowed to report back to the department where there's infrastructure that's non-compliant, and so it seemed a reasonable approach to us to do it on a contract basis.
So I want to be clear. So we're looking at this is going to be an ongoing program in order to remain in compliance. So, but we're looking at $391,000 per year for 2 years, and then $3.2 billion is one-time money to hire a consultant, I guess, to give us a status report.
To help us develop the compliance plan or the pieces that we need to meet with the compliance.
So then what happens long term? It seems to me there's also going to be a need long term if to continue this program.
And we recognize that, but we don't have enough information at this point in order to come in for a permanent request. We would evaluate this over the next 2 years and then come back to the legislature if, in fact, we needed additional resources.
Okay. All right. Ms. Harkey.
That seems like a huge dollar amount for a contract for a consultant, $3.2 million. And I know there's going to be continuing costs. And what I'm wondering, we need some kind of, I mean, I don't want to second guess all the analysis that's gone into this, but it just seems like a lot of money to set up a program. I know we already, it's a lawsuit settlement, ADA. We already comply with ADA measures now in other departments and for locally. I mean, isn't there some way that we can integrate this into our current program so that we're not starting up a whole new department?
We will be integrating a big part of it into our existing program. A number of the projects that we are going to be required to do are going to be rolled into our SHOP program. And so that is the plan. However, there are a number of other elements that are not things that we currently do. So, you know, $3.5 million we think is the correct estimate. Now, we would come back to you later and determine whether that is the right number or the right staffing, because it is something that we're going to have to monitor for a number of years out.
Any questions? I do have one more question, I guess a little bit out of curiosity, but having served on the school board as long as I did, when we sent plans to the Department of State Architecture, they had to be signed off for structural, fire life safety, and ADA accessibility. So when we build our roads and to have all of our highway transportation projects, are there current standards for that? Are we talking about roads or freeways that have been built many years ago, or what are we dealing with when we talk about ADA accessibility for highways?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Rick Land, Chief Engineer for the department. This relates mostly to our existing infrastructure, things that were built years ago where we have deficiencies. When we do current projects now, we address the ADA aspects of new projects as we construct them. We have very tight guidelines and very concise procedures to follow relative to ADA compliance in our designs. And so this relates mostly to the existing infrastructure.
So will they be looking at infrastructure that's more than a certain number of years old and provide a report on which is ADA compliant, which isn't, and what the estimated cost is to bring the non-compliant roads or infrastructure up to compliance? Is that the scope of the project?
Well, the idea behind the consultant services that we bring on board is that as a result of the ADA lawsuit settlement, we are supposed to set up the ability for members of the public or even local entities to bring complaints to us relative to an existing deficiency somewhere in the transportation system. And usually this relates to state routes that fall within city jurisdictions, but they're state routes. And so we anticipate that in inviting those kind of complaints is going to lead to a heavy workload of going out and reviewing the complaint, assessing the validity of the complaint relative to ADA law and standards. And it's that workload that we were really trying to set up the consultant services contract for. Now, if it turns out that the level of complaints that we think we're going to get doesn't materialize, that we would reevaluate whether we need to continue using consultant services for that, or whether we would somehow absorb it into our state staffing.
So the consulting services are to set up a complaint system and not to actually do the inspections of the roads? We're going to rely...
Right.
So
They
we're
would evaluate the complaints that we would receive relative to ADA deficiencies on our system.
Our understanding is that the consultant resources would be used to field those complaints when they come in, but then also to go out and do the field inspection evaluation to look at the facility to see if it really is non-compliant. There would be some engineering analysis that would need to go into that. And so it's not just a call center for taking calls, but they would actually be following up on it.
My question, and I'm not trying to prolong this discussion, is that why are we relying on people to complain to determine whether or not a road meets ADA standards? Why aren't we inspecting those roads that are over a certain age, and to determine whether or not they're ADA compliant?
A large part of this consultant services will in fact do those field inspections. And so there is that element of it, and then there is the complaint part of it.
So before or after the complaint?
Before the complaint.
Yeah, see, there are several aspects to the settlement, and one has to do with an evaluation to a certain extent of the existing infrastructure. And recognizing that we have roughly 15,000 centerline lane miles of state highway, it's a pretty onerous thing to go out and assess the entire infrastructure at one time and say, well, these are the deficiencies.
So, Harkey?
Is this like a Caltrans type? I mean, we have Caltrans throughout the state. Why wouldn't Caltrans be the natural place for this to occur on their inspections, their repairs, whatever? And couldn't we have some efficiencies rather than adding a whole different layer?
That was initially what we were proposing to do, but it was deemed not sufficient. So
was deemed not sufficient by whom?
That was part of the lawsuit, that we were not doing it fast enough, that we were not providing the information. So the consultant contract would help us do some of those field inspections.
Are there any other questions? Is there a motion?
I'll make the same motion as before to approve the funding, but not the new position authority.
Is there a second? Well, then I will second it. I understand your frustration, but given that we've got a court order and they won't allow Caltrans to inspect, I think we're caught between a rock and a hard spot here.
Yeah, if I had more information, I might agree. I just feel like we're missing something.
Not logical?
Not logical. It's just
okay.
Something's wrong, and
I understand. Can we call the roll? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Jim Parks, Department of Finance. Two of those positions are currently expiring at the end of this year, so it's not like we're adding additional bodies. We'll be losing 2 bodies.
Okay. Can we call the roll?
Buchanan?
Aye.
Buchanan, aye. Adams? Evans?
Aye.
Evans, aye. Fuhrer? Harkey?
Okay, we'll leave the roll open. All right. I think the last big area we have.
Could I just clarify from the Department of Finance? You said they were expiring at the end of this year. Did you mean the fiscal year or the calendar year?
The fiscal year.
Thanks.
Okay, now to the big item, the overview of the capital outlay support. And we might want to start out with hearing from the LAO.
Yeah, as part of our analysis of the 10-11 budget, our office reviewed the capital outlay support program's budget. We looked at several years of data. We looked at information from a variety of other agencies to try and get a sense of whether or not the department's COS budget is justified. It's intended that the program's budget be zero-based each year based on the work that needs to be done on projects. In doing that analysis, we found that there is no workload justification for the program. Obviously, the department needs some people to do this work. There is work out there, but the level of work and how that matches up with the staffing levels that they've requested in the past, we don't have that type of connection there, and so the program's budget has not been justified for the past several years. To get a sense of whether or not the level that they've been requesting is reasonable, we performed a comprehensive analysis looking at several different factors to try and sort of gauge the reasonableness in the absence of having that workload information. We compared Caltrans to similar agencies that also manage capital outlay projects, and from this analysis it appears that Caltrans has higher costs due at least in part to higher staffing levels. When we asked the department about this, they were not able to explain why, but just indicated that the way that they count support costs would be different from the way that other agencies count support costs. It complicates the comparisons. However, even when we took that into consideration, it looks like Caltrans costs were still higher, and there wasn't a rationale for that. We compared the staffing levels in each of the districts, each of the department's districts or regions, and we compared those to the size of the capital program. The point of the program is support for the capital program, and so we thought that there should be some relationship between the support needed and the size of the capital program. And we found that there appeared to really be no relationship between the two. Some regions had really high staffing levels, but small programs, and vice versa. We took it a step further and then looked at the projects that the department had indicated they were going to work on in the current year and compared that to the STIP program, the State Transportation Improvement Program, and the SHOP, the State Highway Operation and Protection Program, and looked at the projects that were programmed, compared them to the projects the department was supposed to be working on, and we were not able to link up the two to see how what the legislature is approving in the annual budget matches up with the projects that are in the program that need to be worked on. We also found that based on the number of projects in the program in certain regions, that it does not at all appear to justify the level of staffing in those regions for the type of work. For example, looking at design work, we looked at the number of projects programmed in the STIP and the SHOP, and we didn't see how the level of design engineers, for example, that were in a particular region were justified based on the number of projects, the dollars that were programmed for that work. There was a large disconnect. We asked the department about this, and they, again, were not able to explain. We also then looked at a sample of projects that had been recently completed. We asked the department for this sample. They provided the projects. We did not select them. In looking at this, these were projects in the STIP, so it's not representative of all projects. However, this was the most comprehensive project data that the department had available to us. We found when we looked at these projects, 30 of them, that costs on these projects were high. They were some of the project support budgets that were approved initially were very high in terms of the ratio between the support cost to the capital cost. So, for example, if you had a $1 million project, in some cases we found that there was, maybe $700,000 being spent to support a $1 million project, which would be a 70% ratio, which would be very, very high. That'd be very extreme. But we did find a lot of those. The department uses sort of a benchmark of about a third or 30% in terms of the support to capital ratio for a number that would be reasonable. A lot of these projects were way over that mark. We asked the department about it because there are legitimate reasons why specific projects would have a really high support cost if there was, factors in that project that would cause that. But the department was not able to explain why these projects had such high costs. And then additionally, even going beyond what was just the approved budget for the projects, many of the projects actually spent beyond what was budgeted for the project, especially in two areas for right-of-way support and construction support, which have the least amount of sort of accountability and tying back through the STIP programming process. And again, the department was not able to explain why the costs were so high. We also asked Caltrans about the impact of the executive branch furlough program. At the time that we did the analysis and were initially talking with them through the summer and fall of last year, they indicated that there was no impact from the furlough program. After we had come out with our analysis, they then informed us that they had reevaluated and that they do believe that there is an impact from the furlough program. At the time that we did our analysis, we felt that a staffing reduction without a reduction in output also seemed to indicate that the department was overstaffed. However, they have some new information on that. And then lastly, we found that the department has essentially no cost control measures in place. When they're focusing on project delivery, the department is pretty good at focusing on schedule and when a project needs to be ready to list, to go out to bid, to go to construction, and there's a strong focus on the schedule and the timeline of the project. But the focus did not seem to be there in terms of cost controls. And the one cost control measure that the department indicated they have was the checking of time cards that would happen by supervisors or project managers. However, their program management and headquarters indicated that they feel the districts were not doing a very good job about this, and that's what was leading to a lot of the cost overruns on projects, but that program managers didn't learn about it until months after it had already happened. And it just seemed to us like there was really no process in place for actually controlling these costs and making sure that not only the project support budget is reasonable, but then that it's actually adhered to. We have several recommendations for you on the program. First, we recommend that Caltrans provide additional information to justify its COS budget this year and on an ongoing basis. We do recommend that you adopt trailer bill language to put this into statute, to be very clear that this is a high priority for the legislature, and to specify what type of information the department would need to provide on an ongoing basis. We have been working with Caltrans over the past couple of months to come up with a format or a framework in which they might provide the information. However, at this point, we haven't seen any of the content to have any sort of analysis or evaluation to you to report back on whether what we think we're going to see is reasonable or whether the workload's justified. Just that there's going to be a new framework for providing information that we think would be much improved. And we do continue to recommend that you adopt trailer bill language to put that into statute so it would continue on an ongoing basis. We think that if Caltrans doesn't provide the information, we had recommended a staffing cut to the program. Our analysis in the 5 different ways we looked at the program all indicated that it was overstaffed. And so if the information that the department provides doesn't appear to provide justification for the staffing levels and tying it to the workload that they expect in the budget year, then we think that that's something that you would still need to consider. But we're hopeful that we'll get better information from the department. We also think that you should have Caltrans report on the steps it's taking to control its costs, since cost control measures seem to be, or the lack of them seem to be, a significant issue in the program. We also recommend an audit of the program's time charging practices. It was clear to us that they're tying in with the lack of cost control measures, that it seemed the practice of how costs are applied to different projects could be very inconsistent from project to project or district to district and statewide. And so we really weren't able to determine to what extent this is a problem, or to what extent costs are not being charged correctly. But it certainly appears that there's definitely the possibility of that. And so we would recommend that there be an audit of the program, specifically the time charging practices. And that is the extent of our recommendations.
Before we go further, is there another copy of the report? I don't have it.
I read it a while back, but it's, you can see it's filled with, okay. We'll get you one. You might want to, yeah. We'll bring this back. So do you want to respond?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair and subcommittee members, for the opportunity to clarify some of the COS information presented in the LAO report. Obviously, there's some good recommendations there, and we welcome the opportunity for any kinds of improvements. There was also some misunderstanding on some of the information that was provided. But over the last couple of months, we've been working with the LAO as well as with legislative staff to ensure that we do provide the right kind of information to evaluate our capital outlay support workload when it's submitted as part of the May revise. We believe that we have reached an agreement on the type of information. Some of it will definitely be included with the fiscal year 10-11 finance letter, and other information will be added in subsequent years. Rick Land will give you a brief summary of the information that we do use currently to manage our program. It's a very large program, and we'll be able to walk through some of the additional information that we'll be providing.
Okay.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Rick Land, Chief Engineer for the department, and I have some handouts out here that. Again, thanks for the opportunity to provide a little bit more background and some of the detail in the discussions that the department has had with the Legislative Analyst's Office and the Department of Finance over the past few weeks about our capital support workload. Some of the recommendations made, there was a pretty good overview by LAO staff on the report. I want to say up front that one of our main focuses in our discussions has been on workload justification and providing more information relative to the workload. Some of the other conclusions, while we certainly welcome the oversight, we haven't had any discussions relative to the cost of delivery, cost control measures, et cetera. And we're looking forward to that discussion. Over the past 5 years, Caltrans has delivered one of the largest capital programs in decades. And in delivering that program, one of the things that we did was we set a goal of delivering specific major highway improvement projects on schedule within each specified fiscal year. And the total of that is about 1,000 projects with a capital value of $11.4 billion. And I'm proud to report that over the past 4 fiscal years, we've delivered 1,087 out of 1,088 specific projects ready to go to construction on schedule as we promised in the fiscal year. This fiscal year, we're poised to deliver another 306 projects with a capital value of $3.06 billion ready to go to construction on schedule as promised. And we're currently administering 533 highway construction projects valued at $9.4 billion, which support more than 170,000 private sector jobs. We've obligated all the federal stimulus funds made available to the state from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. So the men and women of Caltrans, from my view, have stepped up and met these challenges despite some overwhelming difficulties. The furlough and salary reductions continue to cause some personal hardship. They do increase the difficulty associated with maintaining our project delivery efforts, with far fewer hours available for performing those efforts. We've had to adjust our priorities, and some project schedules have slipped. In an effort to start as many construction projects this year as possible under these conditions to stimulate jobs in the private sector, Caltrans has strategically reassigned employees from projects that would be construction ready over the next 2 or 3 years to work on those projects that are shovel ready now. And to explain this a little bit, I'd like to point to this handout, and I want to start with page 3, which is this chart here. Okay, this chart here is a depiction of our capital outlay program in general terms. It's about $39 billion worth of work representing 2,000 projects that are in some form of project delivery or construction at the present time. In the magenta color, the $4 billion, those are projects that we call closeout projects. Those are jobs where we have completed the construction work out in the field, and we are doing closeout activities such as resolving claims with contractors, doing as-built plans, monitoring, and those kind of things. But our number one focus has been this $9.6 billion that is in kind of the pink color. That's what's under construction, $9.6 billion. I mentioned 9.4. It varies depending, we're always completing jobs and always opening new bids on jobs. So here it's depicted as 9.6. This has been our number one focus. In spite of reduced work hours, we've basically directed staff that if the contractor is working on a Friday where we're on furlough, you need to be there and defer your furlough day to some other day. But we don't want to have anything impact the construction activities of the contractor. So that's been our number one focus. Or we've moved more staff out into the field to make up for the reduced hours, just to make sure that that is covered so that we don't see any impacts with construction going on in the field. The $3.1 billion, the more red color, is what we call our current fiscal year delivery program projects. These are the ones that when the fiscal year starts, we nail down the projects that we are going to deliver to construction within a fiscal year and commit to delivering them. And we have delivered over the last 4 years almost 100% of those on schedule in the fiscal year. That's the red color. The blue part here, the $22.3 billion worth of work, that work is projects that are under development, in some phase of development, that would be delivered ready to go to construction in a future fiscal year. And as you can see, that's a very large piece of the pie. It's about 57% of the $39 billion of work under development. And so that's our third priority, that and the $4 billion cleanup work. So those are some things that, as a member of the public or a contractor, you won't see the impact of reduced hours, because that's where most of the slippage occurs. One of the things that we did do that was mentioned earlier with LAO staff as far as new information being provided is the $3.1 billion that are contracts for delivery. Those are contracts that our director enters into with each district director for specific projects to be delivered in a fiscal year. And on page 4, early in the fiscal year, we recognized that the furloughs were going to have a significant impact on the delivery of those projects. So we had each of the districts go back. There are originally 329 projects that were committed to delivery, and we decided you can adjust those right now based solely on impacts to furloughs, and then we'll manage to that. I didn't want to get later in the fiscal year and have people start saying, well, we didn't deliver that project because we were on furloughs. So we made adjustments up front, and we are sticking to that. But the point of this slide here is that we moved 60% of the delivery dates in some form or fashion for these projects, and it moved 26 projects out of the fiscal year and delayed the about $448 million capital value of projects. And my point in saying is that we took into account what was going to happen relative to reduced hours and adjusted for it, so that when we meet our delivery commitments, it's been adjusted for the impact of reduced hours. As project development and construction work for things like the Prop 1B projects, the federal stimulus projects, as that work is completed over the next few fiscal years, our 5-year workload projections have shown the need for staffing reductions in the COS program. So if you look at the first chart on this page, this one here, the Caltrans 5-year workload, this is what was part of our finance letter last year, where we, as a department, looked out over the next 4 fiscal years. We just didn't look ahead 1 year, and we made adjustments based on what we saw. And so for our finance letter, if you turn to the next page, you can see in our finance letter for 9/10, we made a reduction of 691 full-time equivalents, because what we see in the workload is it going down over the next fiscal years as funding revenues. The bond program ends, era of projects end, and we get back to what I would call our normal standard revenue source coming in. We see the workload going down. And so we've been adjusting for that going forward. And my point in presenting this is that we are paying attention to our workload projections and making staffing reductions in our CS program. And so we are managing the workload going forward. Now, again, the recommendations from the LAO report, the ones we have been in discussion more earnestly on are those relative to better justification of our workload in our finance letter. And we've had a lot of discussions about exactly what kind of things would better articulate to both the Department of Finance and the Legislative Analyst's Office and the legislature on what our workload looks like going forward. And I think those discussions have been very productive. So just to try to indicate a little bit more clearly this is just a high-level indication of what we've discussed. If you turn to the last page, which is this one, the list that is on the top is the kind of information that we had provided in the past, last fiscal year and prior, which has been represented as not very much information. Basically, the project type, what's the work description, how many resources do you need? And in our discussions, what we've moved towards is the list that's below for this fiscal year, where not only this, I guess that's a magenta color on the left, we are doing the additional things that are on the right. Adding the program year, what's the total capital cost? What's the total support budget going forward? What's the support budget by component? And by component, there's the right-of-way phase, there's the environmental phase, there's the design phase, and then we move into the construction phase. So that's what it's meant by component. What were the expenditures in the prior year for that specific project? What's the budget year project deliverable? Are we going to deliver? Are we going to complete the environmental phase? Are we going to get the right-of-way that we need? Are we going to finish the contract plans? Are we going to move it to construction or complete construction? And then for each deliverable, what are the full-time equivalents by component? So we're trying to provide a lot more information for the budget year going forward. Now, there's a lot of different ways to slice this. And so it's taken a lot of discussion because basically we have 2,000 projects in the database. They don't all start on July 1st and they don't all end on June 30th. Some have been in progress for a couple of years. Some will start this year and end later in the year. Some have already started and will begin construction in the fiscal year. So my point is that for each 2,000 projects, it's all over the board, and we're trying to take a fiscal year slice out of it and say these are the resources we need for this fiscal year to do some work in different phases on all these projects. And then demonstrate what that work is, and then at the end of the fiscal year, go back and say, did you do it? And if you didn't, why not? So those are the kind of discussions that we're having, and I think they've been fruitful, but we have a ways to go. But we're trying to put something together that we think makes some sense, and we'll evaluate it as we go forward through the budget year. The other thing is that in your agenda, in Appendix A and B, are some other pieces of information that we've been talking about putting together. And it relates a little bit more to the products that would be delivered within a particular fiscal year, within a current budget year. I would point your attention first to, let me make sure. Yeah, is yours in color in your agenda?
No.
This chart here.
Oh, this? Yeah, that's... Oh, no. No, ours isn't in color.
It's not in color, but we can guess.
Well, we splurged and did a few copies in color, so.
I've been frustrated by that for a couple of years.
I have one in my office if you need to put something in color. I do. I brought one in because it's... Yeah.
Can't see this. Oh, we do have color. Voila.
Okay, so so this is Appendix A, this sheet here, and what we're trying to articulate here is that we can group projects into three areas. The top two areas, minor program and oversight program, those are projects that we don't have reportable milestones in a budget year. The minor program are basically very small projects. It adds up to about $150 million worth of work, and so they typically complete and end in a fiscal year. So we wouldn't have any specific milestones for that. And then the oversight program is there is work that local entities bring to our state highway system with their money, and we need to do oversight on it because we have ultimate liability and responsibility once the project's done. That's about another $25 to $30 billion worth of work, and we have to do oversight on that. But there aren't milestones in that, so that's another category. Of specific focus, though, is the project delivery program, where there are reportable milestones in a budget year or a future year. So this pie chart, which can be pretty confusing, there's 5 slices there, it represents different aspects of our work. The orange represents preliminary engineering work, getting a project ready for construction, where there is a milestone in a fiscal year, in a budget year. The blue is preliminary engineering work where we don't have a milestone in the budget year, but we have a milestone in a future year. The red is where we would complete construction in a future fiscal year. The green is where we would complete construction in the budget year. And then the magenta, I guess, I'll call it magenta, is that work that's post-construction. In other words, we're done with construction, we just need to close it out. And so this is the kind of information that the second page relates to, are these 5 slices. And you can see there's 5 categories of boxes here, and the headings are color coordinated to relate to the slices that I was telling you about. But the point here is we would, I'll just use the first one as an example. We don't need to go into a lot of detail here, but the first one are projects that are in preliminary engineering. In other words, we're getting them ready for construction, and they have a major milestone in the budget year. So we list the milestones, the environmental phase, the right-of-way phase, the design phase, the construction phase. How many milestones in our request are going to be completed in the budget year, and what are the resources associated with completing those milestones? So this is something that we would put forward as part of our finance letter, and then we would follow up on it after the budget year is completed. So I'm just trying to give you an example of some of the discussions and the level of detail that we've been working out with the Legislative Analyst Office and with the Department of Finance as we go forward. This is a lot different and a lot more detailed than here's the project, here's the description of the project, and here's the FTEs that we need with 2,000 lines on it. So we're really trying to work hard, I think, at trying to justify our workload going forward.
Are there any comments from the Department of Finance?
No, we've been working with Finance and LAO and the ledge staff on coming to an acceptable procedures.
Are there any comments from staff? I'm sorry, Assembly members.
I wasn't sure where you were going with that. I have just a couple comments, I guess, mostly, and it's very just reactionary because I didn't have a chance to read the report before I came in, and so I just tried to skim some things while we were sitting here. But so I just want to make some comments, knowing, again, that this is the first time I've really seen this. But I'm a little concerned, and I realize that the plural of anecdote is not evidence, but I've been working with Caltrans now as a local elected official and as a state elected official for 16 years, actually. And over that period of time, I've seen an enormous improvement in how Caltrans is operating. And my part of the state, Santa Rosa, has seen a lot of projects recently, and I happen to live less than a mile and a half from one of the big ones on Highway 101. And thank God it was done, actually not on time, but early, because it was extremely disruptive to my neighborhood. And that was not Caltrans' fault. It's just the nature of what happens. But everybody was extremely complimentary to Caltrans because the project came in under budget and early, which made an enormous economic impact for Sonoma County because Highway 101 is the only way north and south through the county. And that's not the only project. I mean, you can go back to the Bay Bridge and look at what happened there. And there's been a number of projects like that in Northern California. So, I mean, my first response to this report is a little bit skeptical. And it just in looking at it again very briefly, it looks like there's some concerns being raised perhaps with records that are being kept, perhaps some information that may or may not be lacking. Hard to tell at this point. But one of the things that I'm just going to say right now that really worries me in the LAO's report is this conclusion that because the department initially said that there wasn't an impact from the furloughs, that must mean that Caltrans is 15% overstaffed. In my experience with all the departments in the last year and a half since we had the furlough order going into effect, that is always the response. Always the response. And I think that's just what a department head has to say in this administration now, in this climate. There isn't any impact. We planned for it. We dealt with it. The fact is, it's humanly impossible to deal with this. But I also think the conclusion is specious to say that if Caltrans did plan for it and did manage through this time of furloughs, in addition to all of the ARA funding and the projects that have come out in the last year and a half, that therefore, because they dealt with it, it must be 15% overstaffed. I do not buy that at all, and that just concerns me, having seen that right here in this report. So I'm going to spend a little more time reading this, but that's something that I think bears a little more scrutiny.
If I could just clarify, the recommendation to reduce the department's budget by 15% if they don't provide information acknowledging that their workload changes from year to year was not based just on the furloughs, so perhaps I misspoke. It was based on the 5 different methods of analysis that we looked at, all of which indicated that the department was overstaffed. The furloughs, as well as comparing the projects that are programmed in the STIP and the SHOP compared to the staffing levels or the staff resources by district, by program, by type of work. And so we cut it a lot of different ways and looked at a lot of different information, compared the department to other agencies for similar types of projects, similar types of work. We looked at support to capital ratios. We looked at a lot of things. So if I misspoke, it's not tied just to the furlough issue. Some of the, the analysis resulted, based on some of the figures, it was, a 10% overstaffing or a 20% overstaffing. In some cases, it was even much higher. We felt that 15% was a good conservative number, especially in light of the fact that at that time the department was saying that they had no impact from the furlough. But it was really based on the data that we found doing a very thorough analysis of the program.
Well, I'm just looking at the language of the report on page 16, where it says, given that there is little concrete evidence that the program's output has declined due to furloughs, the program appears to be overstaffed by as much as 15%. Then there's a discussion earlier about looking at comparable agencies in other states, and that's what actually led to my question about the furloughs, was because I was wondering if, when the LAO looked at other states, if they were factoring in the difficulty that Caltrans would have in its staffing because of the 15% furloughs, which in my opinion is very short-sighted, because I think it takes more staff actually to do the comparable workload while staff is on furlough. And then I encountered that language that I just read. So like I said, I'm going to read a little bit more, but I wonder about the purpose of the report and some of the methodology. So, but I'll look at it.
And also, if I could just clarify, a lot of the data that we were looking at was over the past several years. It wasn't just looking at the current year data, and so a lot of what we were looking at was prior to the furloughs being enacted in terms of comparing project costs and things.
And from our perspective, I think Jessica's right, but there were some information that I think was either misunderstood or whatever. So the point is, we need to move forward, and we're going to provide additional information. We justify our workload. We're going to be providing that level of detail with our subsequent request for resources.
I appreciate that. And let me be clear. What I'm concerned about is, again, with my experience just in the Northern California region, having seen an enormous improvement in how Caltrans has dealt with the public and dealt with the projects, and what I worry about is losing the improvement I think that we've been making over the last 15 years, and being able to deliver these projects on time, under budget, with a public that is genuinely pleased with the outcome. And that has not always been true. We've had some challenges, and I just think we've seen so much improvement. There's a danger in assuming that because furloughs have happened and because Caltrans has managed that well, that we are somehow 15% overstaffed. And perhaps that language is awkwardly worded. I don't know. I'll give that the writer of the report the benefit of that doubt. But I just worry about losing the good that we've done over the last few years,
And we really
even with the furloughs.
Thank you.
Assemblymember Harkey.
I don't think we risk losing the good we've done. I think we've got a very thorough, comprehensive report, and I'm glad that you seem to be responding to it and providing us with data that we do need to track. With regard to personnel, we should be doing this all along. It's just right now it's so crucial because our state is in such financial chaos. So I appreciate the LAO's work and the comprehensiveness of the study, and I appreciate your responses. One question that I have to ask is on this page 2 chart that we're getting here. It says, the PE projects with major milestones in budget year. We have the milestones and we have the positions, but at what point, how do we know when the milestones were completed that we didn't need less positions, more positions? How are we going back and tracking that?
Yeah, let me respond to that. The information that we're going to provide here, we're going to follow up on at the end of the fiscal year. In other words, for the particular number of milestones and the full-time equivalents, which are the resources we would need to deliver those milestones, at the end of the budget year, we would come back and say, for the milestones that we delivered, here's the FTEs that we needed and make a comparison.
And if you found out that you needed less, how does that impact you going forward?
Yeah, well, let me just say that with each project, there's complications or challenge. I mean, each product has its unique challenges. So the first question that we would be asking ourselves internally is why is it higher or why is it lower? Again, part of the challenge here is taking a fiscal year slice and how our system spread the workload over a period of time. Just as an example, I mean, if you have an environmental phase that has a milestone here, we're going to complete it in the budget year, but we actually started that phase like on January 1st of the prior year. Our systems would spread, let's say we needed 2 FTEs. Our system would spread that as, 1 FTE in the first 6 months and 1 FTE in the second 6 months, so it would show up as 1 FTE needed in the budget year. It could be that the majority of the work was done in the first 6 months, and the remaining 6 months was done with reviews, tossing it back and forth between resource agencies and those kind of things. So those are the kind of questions we need to ask when we roll the data up.
Okay, and I would hope that you continue to work with the LAO so that we get the reporting that we need. Did you have a comment? I'm sorry.
In response to your question of how you'd be able to determine if, at this summary level information, if that was really the right staffing level that was needed, I think we would acknowledge that the summary is a nice high-level overview of the outputs of the program, but it really doesn't provide sufficient data to allow for that type of analysis to say if that's an appropriate staffing level in order to achieve those outcomes. And we have recommended and been working with the department on a more specific set of data that they would provide that hopefully would allow for that type of analysis so that your staff and our office would be able to have something to evaluate to determine if the staffing level is the right level.
Thank you. I think that's the goal, that we have something to evaluate, and so that we can justify what we're doing. Thank you.
I have a few questions, and I want to apologize to the other members because when I was assigned to chair this committee, I read this report and others, so we're at a little bit of an uneven playing field here, although we're going to be bringing this item back. But so I have a number of questions. What management software programs do you use now to manage your projects at both the project level and at the agency level?
Well, at the program level, we're using what's called Expert Project Management Software. We call it XPM. And it was something that we started using back in the 1990s. And for the past few years, we've been working on a new tool called Project Resource and Schedule Management System. It's a healthy IT project, and we're going to start rolling that out in implementation phase sometime this calendar year. And when you have an organization as large as we do, it's going to take a little bit of time to roll that out. So we'll roll it out in 1 or 2 districts to start with, and train staff. So that's the one that we're moving towards. It's off the shelf, but it needs a lot of configuration to match our system and our method of operation.
Because the reason I asked that program is when I was on the school board, we did about $1 billion worth of construction. We had far more sophisticated, off-the-shelf project management than you appear to have here. And it seems to me that when we're spending billions of dollars, that it's absolutely critical that that be utilized. Because if you're utilizing it, you're not going to have to try to design reports like this. It should be able to aggregate it and give it to all of you on an ongoing basis to manage those projects. So to me, that should be a high priority. So I don't know where that falls in the budget, but when we come back, I'd love to have an update.
Project funded, and but it did take a number of years to get it through the process. It was a big IT project. It took a while to get us.
And is the Chief Information Technology Officer working on that? Working with you on that?
Yes. Mm-hmm. We have folks working, in the department, working with folks at OCS.
So when do you expect to have it implemented then? I mean, because using software we were using in the early 90s and it's now 2010, I mean, it's
going to take approximately 2 years to roll this out and get it up and running.
Because I would suggest that, on the one hand, we clearly need better reporting than what we have right now. On the other hand, we don't want to duplicate setting up reporting systems if we have one. I mean, like I said, a good reporting system should integrate all that and collect the data and give you the report you need. They should be able to give you your timelines, your milestones, your position equivalents, your cost. All that stuff should come out of it and should not only give you the information you need, but should give this committee the information it needs to take a look at that and know where the dollars are going.
One of the challenges, just again to be clear, with XPM in particular, which is the one we've been using for the last 15 to 20 years, is that it looks at project schedules and resources on a project basis.
Right.
And so it becomes a very tedious operation to take a fiscal year slice out of that and do an analysis on that fiscal year slice. That's one of the challenges. And one of the things I didn't speak too much about that goes to Jessica's point, which I think is very good, is that, this provides high-level programmatic stuff, but it doesn't get down to the project level, the 2,000 projects.
Frankly, it's not useful at all, to be honest. It's nice knowing where the different projects go in terms of total dollars, but in terms of making management decisions and budgeting decisions, it's not that useful. I mean,
one of the things that I think is important to note that I don't think we've mentioned clearly enough is that in Appendix B in your agenda, it's basically a spreadsheet which gives you a line-by-line project look and has the total budget information and some budget year data that I think goes more to the project-by-project look that the LAO and the department has worked out as well. Let's see if this gives us what we're looking for.
Well, what I would like to suggest is that maybe you can work with the LAO's office, since you're trying to work with reporting, and take a look at what you're going to get through this new system that's going to be fully implemented and how it's brought online. So one, we don't spend money doing something twice, and we also involve the Chief Information Technology Officer so that it's standardized with what we're doing at the state level. It seems to me that that's something we ought to be looking into as a way to become a little bit more efficient, save money. My next question is, you talked about the fact that Caltrans is basically a zero-based budgeting system because, you can only hire employees and do work to the extent you have dollars coming in, right? And I believe in the beginning of your report you talked about the fact that with your the employees that you have hired, part of what you have to do every year is take a look at where the work is with different regions and adjust staffing accordingly. So can you elaborate a little bit on what your process is to make sure the people who are working are aligned with where the projects are?
Yeah, one of the things that is important to note here is that the report does make an analysis on workload by region. One of the things that we've noted in the report, and again, I want to be clear that we haven't had a lot of discussion with the LAO on other aspects other than workload justification. So there's things in the report that we haven't had a chance to really sit down and work through. Some of the comparisons made uses data that isn't complete. It only looks at the construction support dollars for the statewide look instead of the whole $39 billion program. So there's some issues that we need to work out and resolve relative to what some of the conclusions are that have been reached. Having said that, though, there is work that varies from region to region over several fiscal years. And so it doesn't vary by a lot, but it does vary. So in some areas we may have less of a particular type of workload than others, and we do brokering from region to region, where if we have more environmental staff in one area of the state and we have and they don't have as much work in a particular fiscal year, but we have more work than staff in another part of the state, we will broker that work across the state, move staff if we need to, if it's a long-term need, but usually we work this out amongst the regions where we're sharing work back and forth.
So where you can give us a chart like this that says this is what our staffing is going to be based on our projected workload, okay? Do you do that over a period of time within regions so you know where you're shifting people?
And not only that, we've been looking at this from the standpoint of functions as well.
So can you give us then, as part of the budget, a summary of what your staffing has been by region over the last couple of years so we know how you're shifting?
As part of the May revise, I think that might be a little bit of a challenge, but we can certainly present it down the road. I don't think it'll be ready for Friday.
All right, well, the reason I ask is because, you know, when I first read the report, I figured my assumption was, well, you know, the LAO must be coming to conclusions based on a faulty interpretation of the data. And as I got more and more into the report and looked at the different ways it was compared, it was hard not to draw the conclusion that there needs to be some adjustments in how you staff. And when you look at the chart on page 15, when you look at positions per 100 million of capital and you go from 40 in the Bay Area, and of course they may have more contract workers, I don't know, but you go to 187 in the central region, and then it's 100 in the north, 77, 148, 75, 118. You know, when you look at some of the different numbers on here, it's hard to draw the conclusion that you are truly taking a zero-based approach and you know, adjusting staffing on a continual basis.
And actually that's one of the figures that we would like to revisit with the LAO as far as the data used in the report. Granted, the data that they used came from the department, but the data asked for and how it was used, there was not a clear communication between the department and the LAO on that. And so the conclusions that were drawn from that, we need to have more discussion on so that we understand how the conclusions were drawn. Because as the program manager over the COS program, I am very interested in the conclusions that are being drawn because I'm always interested in improving the program. So we need more discussion on that. We just haven't had it yet.
Yeah, the data that we used in this figure did come from the department in terms of the size of the capital program. The number of positions came from the salaries and wages document. We asked for the size of the capital program, including the complete capital program, not just the in-construction capital program. The department gave us the wrong data. We went back and confirmed with them and said, is this the right number? And they said yes. So all we can do is use the information that they give us. when this was brought to our attention that they had updated numbers because they had given us the wrong information, we asked for them to provide that broken down by different regions so that we could update our analysis. That was 2 months ago. We have not seen the updated information. So we have had the discussion with the department. We are, wanting to see the correct data since they gave the legislature the wrong data, but we have not seen that yet.
I have lots of questions, so I'll try and keep it brief because I know. But the problem I had when I look at future workload is I don't know how this ties to future dollars and how it ties into, when we run out of 1B money, because we don't know if we'll be able to pass another massive transportation bond, when we run out of the ERA funding, and I don't know what percentage that is of the total funding, and so it's hard to say these numbers are right or they're wrong or whatever. But my interest when we come back and take a look at the Caltrans budget is, one, knowing that our workers are allocated in such a way that we are able to get as many projects done as possible. I mean, we have unemployment in California right now that's 12.6%. And, if we want to get down to 5%, which economists consider full employment, we've got to create 1.3 million jobs. And, on top of that, we're not seeing the home building industry rebound really fast because we know that we've got a glut of homes out there right now. So a lot of the work is in the infrastructure, which is why the federal government dedicated those ERA funds to transportation and other projects. So what's critically important to me is that, as part of the budget process, we talk about how we're going to get as many projects out to bid as soon as possible. And that tied in with that, we allocate our staff as efficiently as possible. And that if there are errors in this report, that's, so be it. But I think we owe it to the public to explain, what those are and then, and how we're going forward. Because, when I take a look at that, if we were overstaffed by 1,500, I'm not saying we are, and that's $200 million in projects, that $200 million, those are other projects that we could be bidding and getting out the door. I mean, in my own district, I can think of one project that, I every time I go out there, I get hammered about it being a safety issue. It's about, $20 to $25 million, but it'd make a huge difference in my community, and I'm sure Member Fuhr and Member Harkey and others have similar projects. So I just think it's really important when the state sees a 20% drop in revenue, I guess now it'll probably be 3 years in a row, and people are out of work, that we make sure even when projects are funded through non-general fund dollars that we operate as efficiently as we can, that we deliver the projects, as many projects as we can to get people back to work. And clearly, I mean, your on-time record, based on what you said, looks like it's admirable, but I think those are questions that have to be answered.
And I think one of the problems that we have trying to manage a multi-billion-dollar program is the fact that we do not have stable, reliable funding. And you start moving along one path, and you're going to fund a project with bond dollars, and then, we have to kind of halt things. And so there's some inefficiencies in having to deal with those types of things. We have a number of projects that are being funded by local measure dollars. And with the sales tax, coming down, all of a sudden projects that we thought were going to be going to construction, there isn't enough money from a local perspective to build those projects. So there are some problems in the way we are funded that contribute to some of those types of things.
And I recognize that, and part of any budget planning process is you do what I like to refer to as stress tests, but you take a look at, where are we going to go if these funds come in or they don't come in, and I know your job's not easy, but, when you read a report like this, I'm sure, it's, you don't want that to reflect what you're doing, so I think we need to set the record straight if it's not straight and respond to it, and make sure as we move forward that we're doing the very best job we can. If there are any other questions, we need to, we've got the one item open and then a public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. Steve Baker with Aaron Reed & Associates, representing the professional engineers in California government. I'll try to make this brief. The positions that you're talking about are the bulk of our membership, so this is an important issue to us. We agree with the legislative analysts and the comments made by you and others that Caltrans needs to do a better job justifying this workload and providing the information to you and to the public so that people are confident with what they're doing. However, I think Mr. Land did a good job and maybe could have even done a better job kind of tooting Caltrans' own horn on what a great job they've done. I think Assemblymember Evans, touched on her experiences. I hope those are the experience that people are having around the state. You've got 99.9% project delivery on time and on budget. You've got $1 billion in ERA funding delivered early. You've got billions of dollars of the bond money that's been delivered on time. We cautioned the committee and others about going overboard and cutting too many positions so that those kinds of successes aren't carried on into the future. You're going to get the May revise dumped in your lap on Friday, and you're going to have very little time to deal with this. Last year, the department took a 500 PY reduction on top of the furloughs. You've talked a lot about the furloughs, but they got a 500 position cut also. So again, we want to make sure that things don't go too far, that they've got the positions that are necessary to keep the economic engine going. And if they are overstaffed to some extent, we think that there's plenty of room on the high-speed rail end, that high-speed rail could use some less expensive engineering positions to help out and deliver that project on time and on budget. So with that, we'll look forward to talking to you next week when the May revise comes out.
Well, you have more. I would just respond to that by saying I think you hopefully picked up that none of us here on either side of the aisle think the furlough idea is a good idea, and there certainly is not, as at this point in time, what we want to try and do is work with you to be confident that whatever the staffing level should be, whether it's not cutting any or cutting the whatever, that we all have confidence in that level and can justify it.
Madam Chair, Dave Ackerman, representing the Associated General Contractors. We're on the back end of projects. When you talk about project delivery, you're talking about delivery to the bid room. You're not talking about delivery where you have the ceremony where you turn the first shovel of dirt to start a project or cut the ribbon to finish it. That's where my clients come in. We do probably a majority of the work for Caltrans on constructing the project. They try to deliver it. We can only construct if it's delivered. I echo your comments, Madam Chair, that you're going to have to pick a number here somewhere. Whether finance comes out with a letter and recommends a reduction or what, you're going to pick a number. I just hope that number is the right number that doesn't end up in project delays. Our industry is suffering close to 30% unemployment right now. Caltrans would love to bid all the projects tomorrow because most bids are coming in at 20, 30, 40% under engineers' estimates because our guys are starving for that work and willing to bid against each other pretty aggressively to get the work. I think Caltrans would love to put it all out on the street right now if they could, because they keep our guys' feet to the fire to deliver the projects. What I would like the committee to consider is when you pick a number, and you probably will pick a number, I don't want you to come back a year from now to evaluate, did we pick the right number? If there is some methodology to where you can have Caltrans do their normal either quarterly reporting or monthly reporting on their project delivery status so that during the year you can come back and revisit this. If you pick the wrong number, we want to be able to reevaluate the staffing so that you can come back and maybe adjust that so we don't impede project delivery and getting those projects to bid, because my clients depend on those projects going to the bid room.
Well, I think having periodic reviews makes sense. My hope is that we're not throwing a dart at the dartboard to pick the number. My hope is that between the work you do and working with the LAO, that we come up with a real number that allows us to get as many projects out as we can next year, to get people back to work, to take advantage of the great bidding environment and start to turn this economy around. Because I know if we don't, other programs that we value, such as education, are going to suffer. So that's my hope, that we don't blindly pick a number, but we pick one based on the very best information we have, and it's based on our ability to get projects done and out to bid. Because frankly, I wish we were, instead of talking about even making any reductions, I wish we were talking about adding, because as a result of being able to get more work out there. But I do think we have to respond so that we have a number that we have confidence in ties to the work that's being done.
Thank you.
So we have one item that's open.
Let's go through it.
Okay. All right.
So, the first issue, the consent calendar. Issues 1 and 4 were pulled off. The current vote is 3-0. Absent member Mr. Fuhr.
Aye.
Fuhr, aye. That's 4-0. Consent issue number 1. The motion was to approve the funding in the proposal with no position authority. Current vote is 3-0. Absent member Mr. Fuhr.
Aye.
Fuhr, aye. 4-0. Last issue, consent issue number 4. The same motion, approve the funding with no position authority. The current vote is 2-0. Absent member Mr. Fuhr.
Aye.
And Ms. Harkey, who's absent. Oh, she's not voting. So 3-0. That issue's out. And one more issue. Issue 1 on the California Transportation Commission. The motion was to approve the proposed trailer bill with the caveat that we would work with staff to address some issues. The current vote is 3-0. Absent member Mr. Fuhr. Fuhr, aye. Actually, the last issue, issue 2 for Caltrans bridge inspections. The motion was to approve the funding, no positions.
Yes, aye.
Fuhr, aye. 4-0. That's concluded.
Thank you. This meeting's adjourned.